All right, guys, in this video, we're going to talk about visual design, specifically how we use elements and principles of design to create effective products or buildings or whatever it is that you want to make appealing to people. Okay? I think this is a fun topic to talk about because as an engineering teacher, we focus so much on function and things like that. How well things work, do they do the job? But this is a lot different. Okay? So I hope you learned something. So first thing we're going to talk about are the visual design elements. These are the tools that we actually use to create designs. Things like point, line, color, value, shape, form, space, and texture. First up is point. I think we're all pretty familiar with what those are. You can graph them using coordinates, and mainly we use them for things like location. Next up are lines. All right, lines are one-dimensional. We can use them for boundaries to indicate volume, for creating perspective or depth, but I think more importantly for things like suggesting movement or even implying emotion. Okay, I'll give you some examples. Vertical lines are used for things like formality or strength or stability. Great example is the Empire State Building. Bunch of vertical lines here to use in this skyscraper, or really any other skyscraper. If you think about, the type of person that you imagine working in that building. If you're like me, you imagine somebody in a suit because the building gives you an air of formality or dignity. Same thing really for any skyscraper. Whereas the Brandenburg Gate, again, these columns really emphasize the vertical lines. That's a show of strength, right? To be impressed by not only the gate, but whatever's on the other side of it. Then you got horizontal lines, which by contrast, right? Horizontal lines give you a feeling of peace and relaxation, like the horizon on the beach, or this bathtub here where they use horizontal lines on the walls to really give you a feeling of relaxation. And if you're in the tub, that's probably what you want. Diagonal lines, much different. Okay, they show movement, activity, a lot of energy in these designs here. Much different than if they were vertical or horizontal lines, even if they were the same color. Then we got curved lines, which can be used for things like freedom or creativity. Sydney Opera House is a great example, right? A lot of artistic things go on in that building. So the curvature in the building really gives you the mood and the feel that they wanted when they designed it. Next up is color. Okay, color is so important when it comes to design. A great example would be the orange shampoo that I just bought yesterday. Okay, if I'm being honest with myself, when I walk down the aisle, I see 50, 100 bottles of shampoo. I've got no idea which one I want. All right, there's two things I look at. Number one is price, but even then, a lot of them are cheap. Number two, whichever one stands out to me. And the orange one stood out. It's my favorite color, so I ended up buying it. And there we go. Whoever designed that clearly picked that color to appeal to somebody like me. But there's more to it than that. You've also got things like warm and cool colors. Cool colors give you a cool or comforting or soothing feeling, whereas warm colors can give you more of an energetic or active feeling. Then you got color in general, which gives you a real strong effect on any design. Next up is value. So value is the relative lightness or darkness of a color, object, or shape. Okay, basically when you go from faded to full color here. Our next element here is shape. So shapes we can break down into geometric, mechanical, and organic. So your geometric shapes are the ones that are your standard circle, square, polygon, triangle, whatever else. Any kind of a two-dimensional shape there. Next up is mechanical. Those are usually fairly simple shapes combined together. A lot of straight and curved lines. Okay. Lastly is organic. Organic is one that looks the most natural. It's made to simulate nature. Okay. These are used all the time. If I'm designing, let's say, any kind of a product that maybe so eco-friendly shoes, and my logo for that company is probably going to be organic shapes because I want people to get a feeling of this is related to nature. Versus if I'm designing some, high-tech new technological innovation, probably going to use mechanical shapes in my logo because I want to give that feel when I'm selling my product. A form is just a 3D shape. So cylinder, sphere, cube, those are all forms. Same things apply when we're talking about how to use them. Okay. Next is space. This one's pretty simple. Positive space has a lot of stuff. Negative space doesn't. So you can really create a certain feel when you look at some spaces based on how cramped or cluttered or open that space is. Then we have texture. So smooth, give you a modern feel versus rough, maybe a little bit more historic. And then fluffy, I think the duck just looks cute. All right, so this is kind of the crux of what we want to talk about are the principles of design. So design principles are how you use certain elements combined to create a certain design. Okay? So first up is balance. Another word for this is symmetry, basically. So symmetrical balance is where we intentionally, use an axis of symmetry down the middle of something, and the left and right are going to be the same, or top and bottom are the same. Okay, might not be perfect, because this plant's not the same as this one, but they're supposed to be, and they're so close, we do consider this symmetrical. Versus informal balance. There's a building here and a building here. They're not the same really at all, but at least we've got something similar filling space here and here. We got an object here and an object here. All right, looking across my classroom here, we have some desks on the left and we got some desks and tables on the right. They're not the same, but they are spread. So I would call this informal balance, what I'm looking at here. Then we got radial balance. So rather than a line of symmetry, we have a point in the center. So the symmetry goes around the middle, just like this ballroom here. Emphasis, super, super useful design principle here. So great example is this image on the ceiling here. When you look at this picture, that image is definitely emphasized based on a few different reasons. Number one, the room is all light colors and this thing stands out as, we're using blue here. Number two, placement. It's protruding from the ceiling and it's right in the middle of this protrusion coming out. Number three, when you look at the picture, you see the person and then your eyes follow the person's eyes up here. So a lot of different ways that your eyes are drawn to this emphasized image here. Great example is the seatbelt. That red buckle there is, intentionally made that color to stand out from everything around it. Because unless you've got red seats, that's going to look a lot different. Contrast is similar. Great example is this skyscraper here. Looks with some vertical lines. It's really smooth and shiny. Looks modern versus this building here where a lot of horizontal lines and you got a lot of texture rather than smoothness. There's, it's not mostly glass or metal like this one. So you get a lot more historic or older feel here compared to this one. So if you're imagining who works here versus who works here or who's in this building versus this one, you get a different impression of who's in there. Next up is rhythm. So rhythm, is basically when we're talking about a pattern. So a regular rhythm is your standard pattern where we repeat an element over some, interval over and over here. Versus a random rhythm is where we tend to use the element in a lot of different places, like this dome here, this form here, but it's really not regular. It's just kind of randomly interspersed. And then gradated rhythm is when we go increasing or decreasing as you go. So Reschen-Nesendals, decreasing in size here. And then lastly, we have proportion, or next, not last. Great example here is the Washington Monument, where, the Washington Monument, super, super important American relic, right? And we want it to look tall and impressive. So the law that bans you from building buildings that are higher than a certain height in DC makes sense, because if you had a bunch of skyscrapers surrounding this, it would not look so impressive. So proportion. Then we got unity. Unity is where we're consistent with our use of elements. So we're tending to use the same color or the same types of lines or, the same value or texture or whatever it may be. Great example is this architecture here. All these buildings look like they belong. We're using the same material. We're using the same colors, a lot of the same shapes in the windows and so on and so forth. Everything looks like it belongs. Okay, lastly, we have economy. Economy is where you're really using bare minimum, right? You're not wasting space or you're not wasting money. I think more importantly, that doesn't mean it's ugly. Sometimes less is more, or there's beauty in simplicity. Great example I can give you is when you go rent a car, right? Um, Although most of you guys are too young to have had this experience, um, the cheapest option is called the economy car. All right, it's going to get the job done. It might even be a new model, but it's not going to have any of the fancy features. You're not going to have, a turbocharged engine. It's not going to be a V8. It's not going to have off-road capability. You might not even have power windows, but it's going to have four wheels. It's going to be reliable, and it's going to take you from point A to point B. It's economy. It's going to get the job done, and that's about it. All right, but there are some advantages to that. So, hope you learned something today, guys. I think it is super, super, super important to know, how designers and why designers make the choices that they do. So, if you will, take a look around you. Look at something that was designed by somebody that you chose to buy. Why did you buy that? There's probably a lot of other options that do the same job that it does. So, why did you choose the one that you chose? Was it the color? Was there some kind of a logo that stood out to you? Maybe it's the brand. So I want you to think about that when it comes to design. All right. I appreciate you tuning in. And if you will, click the subscribe button below, and I'll see you next time.